Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. I'm back here with my co host, Nick Olson. We're pumped up to get back into, you know, this NFL season, right? Obviously, it's a disappointing loss for the Minnesota Vikings week one, but we're really excited because we got to dive into real NFL football tape. We got a bunch of exciting stuff from the Brian Flores defense that we want to talk about, right? It's not the vanilla preseason stuff that we've kind of been stuck breaking down and getting glimpses here and there of what maybe might happen in the NFL season. We kind of got to look at that, and we got to look at what the Vikings offense looked like, with some new personnel, really mostly the same personnel, but definitely they changed things up. So we're excited to dive into this. Before we do that, Nick, anything you want to open up with?
No, yeah, it's fun. It's funny. Like the fan experience on Sunday, obviously a bummer. Like you don't love seeing the offense come out and the run game struggled, same as last year. The three and out struggles, just like last year. Not to mention all the dumb turnovers. The defense was pretty fun to watch until things kind of unraveled a little bit in the second half. But like when I finally got the tape, I was like, at first I was like, oh man, do I really want to grind like the all 22? But like you turn it on and like there's actually a lot of really fun stuff to dive into here. Not just like Justin Jefferson going Super Saiyan at like he always does, or Christian Darrisaw uh, to choosing violence, but also like the fun schemes. Like Brian Flores' defense is really fun to watch. A lot more fun to watch than Ed Donatel, regardless of how good they are. And then the offense, I think they're introducing a number of new wrinkles, which we'll get into here, which I think are interesting and make it fun to watch and talk about. So we'll dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's kick it off with the offense. I mean, I think the story of the game, really, for the Vikings is the three turnovers that they had in this game. That completely changes the game. They were in scoring position for two of them, and then the other two led directly to 3 points on an abysmal offensive series from the Bucs, right? So I don't think if that was, in no man's land, the Bucs are getting anywhere and they're scoring points on that drive, right? So all three turnovers directly either cost the Vikings from scoring points or led to the Bucs scoring points that they wouldn't have otherwise. And when you lose a game by 3 points, that's pretty obviously the reason you lost the game to me. Uh, I think if you look outside of the turnovers, the offense was very explosive, especially in the passing game. The running game wasn't particularly efficient and definitely not explosive. But the offense I thought performed pretty well. But going back to those turnovers, one's a freak incident, right, where Ed Ingram's left limbs really are a problem for the Vikings offense, it seems. The left foot thing last year, he just knocks the ball out of Kirk's hand on a 3rd and 1 when he's trying to get over to the left hand side. I don't see that as repeatable. I've never seen that happen in a football game before, so I think it's probably not going to happen again to the Vikings, right? But it is a problem. The third down sack fumble to me was a good coverage by the Vikings. Like we're gonna get into the Brian Flores blitzes. What the Bucs did on that play was exactly what the Brian Flores blitzes are designed to do. I think so. It was just a really good job, a really good blitz call that worked really well against what the Vikings had for it because the hot route that would have been, I think it was KJ Osborne on that play, was taken out by a tag pressure by a player who was a simulated pressure who came forward who the offensive line needed to account for, and it led to a free rusher on the backside, which is exactly what we want from the Vikings defense, right? So Kirk didn't have this hot answer, and he didn't hold on to the football, which is a problem on that one. And then the interception, I'll hand it over to you, Nick. You want to talk about the interception?
Oh, sure. I was just gonna say on the strip sack, it kind of reminded me of Washington Kirk, where he was just looking left the entire time, and he had Addison
Mm-hmm.
about to uncover on a stick China route, which is it's that stick route. You run down, you kind of like a quick hitch, you run down a few yards, and
Yep.
then you turn around. But with the stick China, you move one way and then you turn back the other way. So it's a short route. It's a really nice route to uncover against man coverage, which it was coming open. You call it a lot on third down, especially because it's a man beater type of route, just because you move. It's like a triple move in a route, basically. And Kirk was going to have it, but he was basically just watching it the whole time for it to uncover, and the pressure came from the other side. So as he was uncorking it, didn't have both hands on the ball, and Winfield's able to get in there for the strip sack. So kind of a confluence of unfortunate events altogether, where Kirk is just reading. It's a half field read. Kirk's kind of blindsided by the strip sack. The blitz call was kind of perfectly dialed up for what they were looking for. So yeah, it's obviously bad, but it doesn't like necessarily concern me. On the interception, that was it was in the red zone, and KJ Osborne's running, I think, like a little bit of a glance route, like a skinny post, where it's kind of like a bang bang play. Like all you want is you just want your guy to establish leverage, and then you got to like really bang that in there really tight because you're in the red zone, especially if they're not blitzing, you're going to have to squeeze it in between a safety. So in the red zone, the windows get very very small. Kirk I think makes the right read. He sees Osborne establish leverage on the route. He sees that he has a window there, and he sees that he has to fire this in there to get it in between the safety. So Kirk, it's a really good ball out in terms of the velocity. The problem is it's just a little bit behind him.
Yep.
Now the ball still hits Osborne. I wouldn't say between the numbers or anything, but it's a little behind him, and Osborne like sees that it's a little behind, so he slows down. Ideally, what you'd want your wide receiver there to do is sort of like see that's going to be a little behind, box out the guy behind you because you've already established leverage, and then you have a touchdown catch. And instead, what happens is Osborne kind of slows down, but like catches it behind him, but doesn't get a good grip on the ball. And the DB behind him, who's trailing, who should be
Hmm.
boxed out, is able to rip it out of Osborne's hands for an interception. So it's unfortunate because like I don't harp on Kirk too bad for that one because I think he made the right decision and I like the velocity on the throw and I think the accuracy was wasn't perfect, but I don't think it was like an awful. I wouldn't chart this as like, oh man, like you didn't even see the defender, just like a terrible interceptable throw. It's just like, yeah, it's not perfect accuracy, but it's not a bullseye, but it's on the dartboard. Like, and your receiver should be able to bail you out there too, but like you can't fault Osborne too much because it's kind of a weird throw to adjust to, and
Yeah.
the DB was able to rip it out of his hands. So, um, these are all concerning kinds of turnovers, but also a little freak on varying levels of freakishness. Like the Ed Ingram offensive own goal is at the top level of freakishness, but like a pass that's a little that's a little off target that the DB rips out of your hands. That's also I don't think we're going to see that a lot of that this season going forward. The strip sack, like yeah, Kirk used to struggle with that a lot, but I think Kirk's got pretty good pocket presence. I'm not too worried about Kirk turning the ball over too much in terms of strip sacks. So I don't know. It was obviously anytime you give up, you cough up the ball 3 times and you force 0 turnovers, it's really hard to win those kinds of games. And the Vikings ultimately, despite being much more efficient in terms of yards per play than the Buccaneers, I think they had more than twice as many yards per play than the Bucs. That wasn't enough to overcome the deficit. So kind of unfortunate, but it also makes me a little more encouraged than the loss or the score would indicate. Just based on, I think these are things that are not going to affect the Vikings long term. So going forward,
Yeah. So on that interception, I agree with you that I don't think that these are issues that are going to like plague the Vikings throughout the year, right? Like you're not going to see 3 turnovers from this team every single game in the season. You are going to have games with turnovers, right? It's not like we're never going to turn the ball over ever again, but we're also going to have games without turnovers. Like that's just kind of the ebbs and flows of the season. And I don't think materially this offense has changed so much from the offense last year or the years before that all of a sudden we're going to start seeing 3 turnovers a game, right? Like Kirk's going to throw some interceptions throughout the course of the season. He's probably going to be around that 10 interception range, right? Give or take a couple interceptions either direction. If he ends up getting hit a ton, and he did get hit quite a bit in this game, probably. Now, and the Bucs are kind of unique because they're a very heavy blitz team, right? So maybe we don't expect him to get hit as much in future games. And some of the hits where he already got the ball out right prior to getting hit, so and he knew the blitz was coming, and that's why he got the ball out quickly. But uh, that's just kind of a digression there from me. It ultimately, the team's not going to turn the ball over 3 times in a game every single game, and we're not going to lose the turnover battle by 3 every single game. So I think it makes a little bit of a difference on that interception. One thing I would have liked Kirk, he does clutch a little bit. He clutches the throw before he actually completes the motion.
yeah,
I think if the ball is out that split second sooner, it's not an interception like that. And I agree with the general location of the throw because it does need to be behind KJ or on KJ's body, giving him enough separation from the safety up top so he doesn't get absolutely decapitated on that play, right? And I think if the ball is out a split second sooner, it can be on KJ's body without him getting decapitated from the safety rather than him trying to have to reach behind it. And credit to the corner who made the interception because he was playing really tight coverage on that in breaking route from kind of a deeper outside leverage. That's not something that's necessarily easy to do because you're expecting that safety help to come and make the hit over the middle. And I think that guy was an undrafted free agent rookie. I forget his name, Izzian, Christian Izzian or something like that, was who
Yeah.
made the pick. So really good play on his part and a little bit unfortunate on the Vikings part, even if they didn't execute it perfectly as well. Like we can say the Vikings failed and that's what caused the interception, while also crediting the Bucs player for making a good play on it, I think.
Yeah.
So the second major issue with the offense, I think that everybody's up in arms about, and it's a pretty big deal, right? I think they went 3 and out on 55% of their drives. I think that's 5 out of 9. I could be wrong on those numbers there, but they had a high number of 3 and outs, and I think the Kirk Cousins fumble is considered a 3 and out in that space. Obviously, that makes a ton of sense, right? Um, I will say, if you look at the Vikings, overall drives, you could say all their other drives that didn't go 3 and out, they got into scoring range, right? Obviously, the interception and the fumble were the errors. I guess it must be 6 of 11 or something that leads to 56%, maybe, or something like that. But I saw, you know, 55% of their drives, they went 3 and out. Do you think that's a systemic issue for the Vikings, or is it something that was kind of a fluky number and they're going to be able to clean up moving forward?
I would. I'm not sounding the alarm bells on the turnovers. I am concerned about the number of three and outs. That is something I do think has the potential to cause problems for the Vikings down the road. And it's because I feel like this offense is too talented to be this bad at getting a first down with your
Mm-hmm.
drives. It's kind of weird. The Vikings only got two drives in the entire second half, but to go three on out and both of them is pretty inexcusable. And they went three and out a number of times in the first half, too. So, um, when you've got Kyle Shanahan making something out of literally Mr. Irrelevant, and you've got Sean McVay turning Puka Nukau,
Nakua.
Kyron Williams into elite weapons. These guys are making something out of nothing. Meanwhile, Kevin O'Connell's got literally Justin Jefferson. Spent your first round pick on Jordan Addison. You got the best tackle duo in the NFL in Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill. You signed all your big money on a new tight end spending, and then you go out there and the rushing attack still sucks, and you're still going three and out all the time. Something's got to give. I don't know. So I put this. This is concerning. I will say. One silver lining is, like you said, the Bucs were the blitz happiest team in Week 1 was the Vikings. The second blitz happiest team was the Bucs. I think teams are going to continue to blitz the Vikings because one, I'm not convinced that Kevin O'Connell has sussed out a good counterpunch to the blitz. The screen game is oftentimes you look to the screen game to counter the blitz, but they got caught a couple times. There was one screen to Ham, one screen to T.J. Hawkinson late in the game. Both were immediately blown up. Part of that's because the Bucs linebackers are really good. Part of that is because when you live and die by the blitz, you also understand that like the number one counter is screens. So you teach your second level defenders to be on the lookout for those. But all that's I feel like it's a little concerning. Part of it I would say part of it is just they're continuing to be behind schedule with the run game. A lot of these three and outs happened because they called a run play and they got hit at the line of scrimmage, and they instead of it being third and three, it was third and 8 or whatever because their one run of the drive was not keeping them on schedule. I think a bigger issue is a lot of their they called a lot of like shot plays explosives, and they were forced to kind of check down or cut loose on those plays, or like check down immediately because of an unblocked pressure coming in or something. I like that it felt like I don't have the exact numbers, but it felt like it was a very play action heavy plan. The problem is if you've got a drive and your first is like a counter that gets stuffed at the line, so now it's 2nd and 9, and you call a boot rollout and you just check it down to the flat option, and now it's 3rd and 7 or whatever. You're putting yourself in situations where it's hard to sustain drives.
Yeah.
You can't score a lot of points if you're putting yourself in third and long a lot, because third and long more than half of the time defenses are going to stop you on those. So the solution going forward is they got to figure out a plan for the run game. I'm not confident they're going to fix that because this was a problem inherited from the last year's Vikings. So that's a little concerning to me. I'm not sure what the answer is there. And then in terms of the pass game, just designing the routes a little bit better so that things are pushed downfield a little bit more and things are able to come open a little bit downfield more. That's yeah, that's I don't think there's an easy solution to the 3-and-out problem. I don't know. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so for me, I was just looking a little bit up. Like on the first drive of the game, they were in a third and pretty good situation, and then they false started, right? And there weren't really a ton of penalties on the offense, so I don't think we can really say that they backed themselves up due to penalty um, all that much. I do agree that the running game not getting, even the 5 yard chunk gains is probably a little bit of a concern. Like we need to see that running game be more effective throughout the year, right? The three or was it like 2.4 yards per attempt just isn't going to cut it from an overall running game. Um, One of the things I think contributes to that, and we'll get to the running game more in detail, is that the Bucs were playing with very heavy personnel and they were playing with very heavy boxes, so that is going to limit your ability to run the football a little bit. But the other thing that showed up in this game is that when the Vikings can't get yards after catch from their tight ends in the flat, and I think the reason they weren't able to get those yards after catch from the tight end from the throws to the tight ends of the flat was how heavily Devin White and Levante David were keying on those throws. Right, you'd see one of those two players there to tackle the tight end immediately when they caught it. It didn't matter if it was Josh Oliver in the flat; they were catching him. C.J. Ham on one play, was lined up at tight end. They got him. T.J. Hawkinson, obviously on those last two drives, the 3-and-outs, they got him at the line of scrimmage both times. And one of them was a screen. The other was the classic, 3-level flood bootleg, which I don't really blame Kirk for doing. I think the direction the Vikings ran it was just kind of bad luck for them because they got a guy directly in Kirk's face, which means he needs to dump it off. And then Devin White made a great play getting to TJ Hawkinson and making the tackle. The Bucs kind of understood what the impact of getting a player directly in Kirk's face unblocked on that play was. Um, so that stuff, those short throws, they need to be getting yards after catch by that, or they need to come up with some way to influence defenses so they are getting the yards after the catch. With that being said, I think I'm honestly kind of willing to take the trade off of we're having a few more 3-and-outs to get the level of explosives we had on offense in this game today.
Yeah.
If we score a field goal and a touchdown on our two turnovers in the red zones, we scored 27 points. We beat the Bucs, and nobody's complaining about anything. I think from this, well, anything's a bit of a stretch, but nobody's really complaining significantly about the results of this football game, right? Like, I think there were, if we clean up the turnovers, all of a sudden this game looks a lot better from the Vikings. So to me, the 3-and-outs, I'd love to be a consistent team where we're not really having 3-and-outs, where we're getting first downs on basically every single one of our drives. A team like the Chiefs kind of does that like every single week, right? Where they're just constantly moving the ball, even if they aren't scoring on every single drive, they're getting to around midfield. And that helps your defense out as well because you're flipping field position every time, right? So I'd love to be able to get there. I don't think this team is there. I do think, we saw some weaknesses in run blocking. We saw some weaknesses in pass protection, particularly from the interior of the offensive line. So even if we have the personnel on the outside and, we just might not be able to put it all together with the personnel that we have on the offensive line and maybe in the running game as well. So that's definitely a concern moving forward. But kind of leading into the running game, that was a little bit of a negative start there. You did quite a bit of work charting it, Nick. Do you want to go through what we saw from the running game, what we saw from the addition of Josh Oliver, and the replacement of Dalvin Cook with Alex Madison as our primary running back?
Yeah, and maybe just to put a gloss on the explosives, Vikings had 5 plays of 20 plus yards last week. That was third most behind the Dolphins and the Rams last week. So obviously, if you can keep that up, and I looked it up, they were fifth in terms of play action percentage. So I think those are
Mm-hmm.
things that you want to see. I think the problem is when the runs are behind the sticks and you're dealing with a blitz happy team, it's going to be feast or famine a little bit. And I will say, maybe to think of an actual recommendation here, the play action game was so split zoney, meaning the tight end is working across
Yeah.
the run action. So the offensive line is say blocking right, the tight end comes behind the formation to block left. They had a lot of things like that and a lot of boots. I would like to see more instead of the 3 level flood. That's kind of just a very basic day one install kind of play action play. I would like to see more. Like just normal 7 step drop back, turn around, and hit like a basic over the middle of the field. I think they have a lot of success over those. Maybe the boots was because they felt like um, Bucks are a more man-heavy team and they've got receivers who can run away from that coverage. But for whatever reason, the Bucks played them very well. I think they've got other play action concepts that they showed here that I think would do well going forward. So maybe we'll see that. To talk about the run game, like you said, I actually charted the entire. I charted the game, but I charted the run game especially, and because I was kind of curious. There's been a lot of talk about like, oh well, we went out and signed Josh Oliver, we gave C.J. Ham this extension, we let Dalvin Cook go. They spent a lot of time thinking about like, hey, we were, I think, the second or third least efficient rushing attack last year.
Yeah.
And so there was all this buildup to see how is it going to change this year, and so far, not a lot has changed. I mean, schematically, they're still a mid zone team, which is mid zone being wide zone, except your lead blocker isn't looking to reach block the end man on the line of scrimmage, but is instead trying to drive block him. Some of this is dictated by fronts or whatever. But it's basically wide zone, except your aiming point is on the inside hip, I think, of the tackle rather than the outside, or the inside hip of the tight end, the lead tight end, rather than like literally sideways to the sideline. So still primarily a mid zone team. They did work in some wrinkles there. They did work in some jet motion, some split zone motion, but that was almost half of their run plays were on mid zone or wide zone, or split zone. Their second most used run concept, and this is something that's different from last year, was counter, where you take it's called counter because the play starts with the offensive line blocking one way, and then the running back takes a counter step, and then he starts moving back the other way. So you it's a good, I think, change up, especially for wide zone teams, because teams with wide zone get so used to triggering downhill, triggering play side to wide zone because they're trying to stretch you horizontally. Well, counter takes advantage of that and says, hey, actually, we're going this other way. So kind of like a reverse, except, and then with counter, you'll usually have two pullers. So whether that's GY counter, the guard in the GY counter
Hmm.
pulls, and then the Y, the tight end pulls, or the Vikings did it with two Ys. They did either a Y H back
Yeah.
pull, YH or whatever. So that's kind of, and those guys become your lead blockers. The problem for the Vikings is Vita Vea blew up a number of these runs because
Yep.
he was very, very good, and the Vikings' interior offensive line was not really equipped to handle him. Then they did run one of duo, which was I get on Kevin O'Connell for getting so cute on third down. They did run duo once on third and short, and it converted. So that was a victory for me because I'm like, why don't stop getting cute? Just like run it
Yeah.
down their throats for once. So they ran inside zone a couple times. They ran. There was a QB sneak. So there was power once on the goal line, which also got blown up. But they're working in different concepts. I like the idea of counter being your main second punch. I think they just need to one, not play Vita Vea every week, and two, I don't know. I think the blocking, honestly, the run blocking I thought was fine. It wasn't like amazing, but
Yep.
I thought I wouldn't criticize even like the Garrett Bradburys or the Ed Ingrams or the people who you're liable to think like had bad games. I thought actually both of those guys were pretty good in the run game. Um, and Josh Oliver I thought was pretty good in the run game. So I think the issue is more just getting more reps, and I think eventually you're going to see, instead of Ty Chandler or Alex Madison going down on first contact, you're going to see some of those turn into 15-yard gains, and that'll boost up the yards per play a little bit. So I'm not terribly concerned about the running game going forward, just based on I think the concept conceptually, schematically, it makes sense, and I don't think the execution is broken. But that's kind of where I'm at the run game. It's not. I don't think it's going to be the most efficient game in the NFL. Then I don't think Kevin O'Connell
Yeah.
is Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan, but I also don't think he's going to repeat as having one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL.
Yeah, I think a lot of the failed efficiency from the run game can be boiled down to, and I don't have the exact numbers on this, but the number of guys, like the Bucks were +1 in the box because they play
Yeah,
a lot
that's
of
a good point.
single high coverage basically every single snap, and that's going to make it hard to run on face as opposed to a lot of these too high shell defenses or whatever you want to call them, the Ed Donatels of the world, it's a lot easier to run when you have two safeties deep than when you have one extra player in the box. The other thing I noticed, and I don't have charting on this either, is that the Bucs, I thought, were playing a little bit heavier personnel than I would have expected, even in situations when the Vikings were in 11. So there was definitely a situation, at least a couple plays on, I think it was the touchdown drive at the start of the second half, where the Vikings had Josh Oliver as the tight end and Madison as the running back, right? 11 personnel with Osborne, Addison, and Jefferson as the receivers. And the Bucs kept the front seven on the field, right? They kept 5 defensive linemen and the 2 linebackers on the field. Or, 3 defensive linemen and 4 outside linebackers, whatever you want to call it, right? With only 4 true defensive backs. That makes it really difficult to run the football when you've got lighter personnel on offense than what the defense is putting out there. I think KJ Osborne's a good blocker, but he's not good enough to necessarily dig out a linebacker, right, on a consistent basis. He's not a Cooper Kupp level blocker. So, that's going to make your running game look bad. On the flip side of the ball, I think the Vikings did the exact same thing to the Bucs, right? And I don't think the Bucs running game is going to be a world beater either. Like, they were absolute garbage last year. I don't expect them to be particularly good this year. They were one of the few running games that was worse than the Vikings last year, I would argue. But the Bucs were not successful at all running the football, in my estimation, by watching the defense either. I think it was kind of a 1-for-1 in terms of how our defenses approached the opponent running the football, which is that we tried to stop it. So I do think you're going to see a little bit more efficiency in coming games. It's not going to be stellar. I don't think we're going to see super explosive 80-yard runs out of Alex Madison, right? I don't think we're going to see a 5-yard per attempt running game on any level of a consistent basis, right? But I think it's going to be respectable. And there were a couple of things I liked from Madison about him being able to fall forward and move through blocks and move through defenders in this game. I mean, the one run where he was completely backed up, hit by multiple players, he spun out of it, got like 2 or 3 yards, was pretty impressive to me.
Yeah.
And even that first down run, like you said, where they ran duo, he had to work through a defender and fall forward to get that first down. So I was pretty happy with him. And what I liked is, and I say this early on is when I noticed it, they really weren't getting, they were getting at least 2 or 3 yards on every play. They weren't getting no gain or 1 yard, right? And that's not incredible, but it's better than, being like 2nd and 7's better than 2nd and 9 or 2nd and 10, right? So there is something to be said for that, even if it wasn't explosive. What was explosive, however, and you mentioned it, was the passing game. I thought this passing game was awesome. I thought the Vikings did a very good job of using 12 personnel and 21 personnel to open up things for Justin Jefferson in this game. You look at a couple of his explosive plays. There was the 25-yarder, I think, that was against Antoine Winfield Jr., and then there was another 30-yarder that was kind of against Antoine Winfield Jr. Really, it was against Levante David. But on that first play, the Bucs blitzed Carlton Davis, and it was left for Winfield to cover Jefferson. The Vikings were in 12 personnel. The Bucs had to have a heavier base on the field, and I think they might have been blitzing against the run. The other time, CJ Ham was lined up on the same side as Justin Jefferson on the outside, and Jefferson was lined up in the slot. The Bucs were in his zone coverage. They start with Shaq Barrett over Justin Jefferson. That's obviously a mismatch, so they did something different. He moved in to then rush the passer, but it's Levante David going back in coverage against Justin Jefferson. Levante David's a great linebacker, but you're taking Justin Jefferson 10 times out of 10 in that scenario, right? The KJ Osborne big play, I say big play, it was like a 19-yard gain over the middle, was also in that 21 personnel. So I think they did a lot of good stuff with the heavier personnel using Josh Oliver to create those plays. And then, in 11 personnel, they had the big 40-yard gainer to Jefferson, and they had the Jordan Addison touchdown. So there was just good stuff all around. Do you want to talk us through the Jordan Addison touchdown, Nick?
Yeah, Jordan Addison touchdown. I mean, it was Addison's funny because I feel like I watched like literally the first 3 tapes of all 22, and I just like immediately completed my Jordan Addison NFL scouting. Like, I know exactly who this guy is.
Yeah.
He is not an X. I do not want to see him against press coverage, but he runs routes very cleanly. He breaks very. It's like a sharp 90-degree angle on his out routes. So I was like immediately like, okay, this guy's going to be good. He's also not going to be your number one go-to guy necessarily. But that's perfect for Justin Jefferson. Like what a complimentary receiver. He's also a tiny boy, so I'm not sure how I feel about him being out there in 12 or 21 personnel because I'm not sure how much he can block. And it'll be interesting to see if Addison is the guy in there, if he starts taking over KJ Osborne's number two job, if that starts giving it away, whether they're tipping their hand as to whether they're run or pass. But on the touchdown to Jordan Addison, you had Addison kind of running just a vertical route to the end zone. I think they were not in the red zone, but maybe the green zone, like kind of right outside the red zone. And Justin Jefferson was running a deep out. And I believe the Bucs, I'm going off memory here, so don't quote me, but I believe the Bucs were in quarter half, so they had like two quarter defenders over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And a half safety on the other side. So basically, the half field that Cousins is reading, it's in quarters. And both of the quarters DBs read Justin Jefferson on the out, and they also had like the underneath defender. So they had three defenders reacting to Justin Jefferson making his break and turning out, and meanwhile Addison just runs past all of them. And part of that is like, yeah, that's a coverage bust. Let's not like pat ourselves on the back too much for that's less the Vikings doing something good than it is the Bucs doing something bad. But also, one, you credit Justin Jefferson and the gravity he has. Two, you credit Jordan Addison and the wheels he has because he's very fast. I mean, he blew right past them.
Mm-hmm.
People forget that just how fast Addison is because he didn't run the fastest of 40 times. But I feel like his game speed is faster than his 40 times speed. Not that he's not Tyreek Hill, but he's probably got close to 4.4 speed, I think, in terms of like what he plays like. And I think you saw that on that play. And then Cousins, I mean, he's throwing against air, but it was a dart. So
Yeah,
we give credit for those. So it was a
and
touchdown. It was awesome to see. So
to be fair to that Buck safety who was in quarters who needed to go back and cover Addison, he only took like one false step. Like he read it pretty quickly, but he did take a false step towards Jefferson, and that gave Addison the room that he needed. Like if you have a slower player in there, kind of like we had last year, I think you end up in a scenario where we don't complete that pass because the safety was able to get back in time. So Addison, I think, makes the difference there on that touchdown. And to credit the play design a little bit, the depths of those routes break at the point where it's hard for them to pass that off, right? Because after a certain point, the defensive backs do need to commit to their guy, right? You can't have a guy 30 yards downfield and all of a sudden you need to switch. So, that 18 whatever yard depth that Justin Jefferson ran that out route at is probably around the depth where the defense's rules change for when you can pass off or when you just have the same guy all the way.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it was an impressive debut for Madison. That wasn't even the only catch. He had a few others. He totaled for 61 yards.
Mm-hmm.
For your first game in the NFL, that's pretty darn good, especially when you're like technically KJ Osborne got more snaps, but Addison was the more productive receiver on fewer snaps. So, I mean, this is what Justin Jefferson did when he first started out. Like he wasn't the starter. BC Johnson started above him, but I think it was immediately apparent like just how much talent there is. So, and not just on the touchdown, like he got some good yards on a hitch route. Like I said, he ran a couple out routes that I was like, this guy is a really good route runner. Like
Mm-hmm.
the cleanness of his breaks, especially on like in or out breaking routes, I think is pretty darn good. So I'm excited to see more of him going forward. I do think he's going to be an immediate contributor on offense, and that was awesome to confirm being this being his first NFL game. So that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, and even that out route, the last play the Vikings had where Carlton Davis
Good route.
tipped it, like I thought it was a good route. I thought it was very clean. It was just a fantastic play by the
Yeah.
defensive back to break on that ball. Like that was a really, really nice break that he had there. So the last topic we have for the Vikings offense is the offensive line. Did you have anything you wanted to get to before the offensive line, or do you want to roll into it, Nick?
We can dive into it. Rip the band-aid off. Ed Ingram still sucks, I'm sorry to say, but you knew that.
Yeah, it's just like, man, it's rough. And there so the first huge hit I think Kirk took, right, was Ed Ingram just not being able to pick up a stunt, not being able to pass off a stunt on time. And he regularly had those issues. The second Kirk sack, not the fumble. I think we've kind of covered the blitz on that first Kirk sack, where it's just a great design by the Bucs. I don't think there was any particular person in the protection who is at fault for that, other than maybe Kirk Cousins needs to get the ball out, right? Like that's ultimately Kirk is responsible for that unblocked blitzer, right? And the hot wasn't even there, so it's just really a well designed play by the Bucs. But the second sack was all Ed Ingram against Anthony Nelson, I think, who's not even all that high level of a player, right? Like he's been in the NFL quite a while and he's played for the Bucs for quite a while, but he just got worked by Nelson on that second sack that Kirk took. In the run game, there were a couple of really big blemishes for Ingram as well. I thought against Vita Vea, he got worked a couple times. Now, everybody on the interior, I think, at least once got kind of beat by Vita Vea, and he's a really powerful player and really hard to play against. But it was quite a disappointing game from Ed Ingram, who, you know, ultimately you hoped could take a second year leap because he was not good in his first year at all, and we didn't really see that against this Bucs front. Um, you know, we had Austin Schlottman had to come in. I thought he played pretty admirably. Like he was the one responsible for that goal line run that got blown up, but you know, you're not expecting perfection from him. I was very down on Schlottman after the preseason. I didn't think he played all that well. But generally, I thought the offensive line really protected Kirk pretty well, considering the level of blitzes that he saw and they had to face in this game. They're really, outside of, you know, a couple of those Ingram plays, weren't a whole lot of losses that I noted from the offensive line. You might have seen it a little bit more closely than I did, so go ahead on it.
No, honestly, I mean, Pro Football Focus has the Vikings giving up 13 pressures on 47 dropbacks. That's 27.7%. That is below average, or
Yeah.
better than average, I should say. So, especially on a team that is blitzed on literally, PFF had it at 53% of the Kirk Cousins dropbacks. Like they blitz more than they didn't blitz. That's pretty darn good. So, I mean. Ingram was bad, and Ingram's badness, I think, was very acutely felt because he gave up a sack. He gave up another huge QB hit. He caused his own team's fumble off a
Yeah.
botching the snap exchange, and he also had a false start. So kind of like like checking all the bad boxes. But like he had some good reps too, and I feel like the rest of the offensive line, there weren't many mistakes. I mean, Udo, I was pretty worried about him coming in, but he was not as good as Schultman. But like he was still like I would have expected worse. Granted, like the Bucks edge rushers are not world beaters, and the Eagles defensive line is going to give a bit of a bigger challenge. But
Hmm.
I thought the offensive, like especially when you look at like the run totals and you look, and it kind of felt like Kirk was being hit a lot. Maybe you came away, at least as a like on the TV broadcast, I came away thinking like, man, that wasn't a great game from the offensive line. But from the All-22, actually, I thought they were pretty good. So I don't know. I don't know why I didn't translate into better production in the run game. Or I don't know. I don't know why it felt like Kirk was constantly under duress. Maybe it was just all the blitzing, but I feel like they did a good job picking it up. So overall, I'm a little bit more bullish on the offensive line, even with Ed Ingram struggling. So
Yeah, I agree. And I think the backs and the tight ends and CJ Ham deserve credit too for picking up a bunch of
yeah,
those blitzes. There was a ton of corners coming off the edge, stuff like that. Now I'm remembering the first real big hit on Kirk was by Antoine Winfield, and that was one where Madison was matched up against Winfield, and Winfield just beat him with a nice rush move. Madison, I think, is a pretty good pass protector, so I don't expect that to happen every week. I think Antoine Winfield is a particularly skilled blitzer, like he's very good at it. Uh, so you know that is gonna kind of be what it's gonna be every so often. But you know, in general, I am less concerned than I think I thought I'd be after rewatching the All-22 from this offensive line. So I would take that as a positive. Let's flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. And, you know, I think if we're talking about the turnovers, right, and then secondarily the three and outs being the biggest concerns on the offensive side of the ball, the biggest concern on the defensive side of the ball is that we never got the ball back in the second half, right? Only 3 drives in the second half. Part of that was our own doing with our own 16-play drive, but you know, we let the Bucs go on a 17-play drive. Then we stopped them for 5, but then a 10-play drive and another 10-play drive to close the game, right? So really there were a ton of third down conversions in there. They only had 1 third down conversion in the first half. They had 5 more in the second half, and you know, consecutive drive after play after play after play on these drives. So I went through and I did a thing. I have a piece coming out on zone coverage. I think it comes out tomorrow morning. It might come out Thursday morning. I'm not exactly sure on the schedule for that. Where I went over the Vikings' third downs and kind of looked at all of them, saw what they did well in the first half, and kind of what changed in the second half. So first of all, on third downs, they were very blitz heavy. I've talked a lot about Bengal, right? The Bengal front on this podcast. They came out in that way on quite a number of their third downs, right? It wasn't every single one, but they were coming out in the blitz look in every one of their third downs. In the first half, they exclusively dropped out of that until maybe there was a third down on the Bucs' first touchdown drive where they blitzed, but they were dropping out of that into coverage, and that caused Baker Mayfield to hold on to the football. So he was double clutching it. He ended up checking down on a couple plays. He scrambled to the outside, but he was never able to convert for a first down in that first half, and then there was one play where he threw a shot play to Mike Evans that had no shot, and Mekhi Blackman almost intercepted because the Vikings dropped out in a situation where I think the Bucs were expecting them to send pressure, and we're like, okay, we like the one-on-one matchup of Mike Evans. Mekhi Blackman was deep in coverage, and he was in perfect position to break up that pass. So that was kind of the first thing. I think if you look at the third downs that were successful for the Bucs, there were a couple where the Vikings were playing too far off or they didn't execute in terms of stopping the guy. The first conversion that comes to mind is the Mike Evans conversion where Mekhi Blackman was playing too far off and they just threw a quick slant. It was easy for him. In terms of the depths that the corners are playing at that play, I'm not exactly sure if we should adjust those, right? Because it's a zero blitz. All of them need to be at the same level. There's some determination of how far from the sticks they are. But I did need Mekhi Blackman to drive quicker on that play. He was like, by the time he contacted Mike Evans had already caught the ball and he was already like 2 yards beyond the sticks. So at that point, you're just way too far downfield to be able to meet what's effective about that blitz. And that was a point where they did send the house. So, there was an unblocked blitzer off the edge. If you can do anything to make Baker clutch onto that ball, it's going to be a sack. And even if he doesn't clutch onto the ball, you need to make the tackle before he gets the first down. The other one was a screen pass to I forget the guy's name, but it was 83, who's kind of a rookie undrafted three. Devin Tompkins is his name. That's what it is. And Byron Murphy just didn't make the tackle prior to the sticks. He had an opportunity to make the tackle, but the guy broke it. So that's one where you just need to make the tackle on defense. That kind of reminded me a little bit of early Mike Zimmer era when teams would love to run screens against the double A gap looks. And I recall a play from Albert Wilson against the Chiefs where he broke it for like a 40-yard touchdown, right, on 3rd and 10 or something like that. And it's like a screenplay. Come on, how does this happen? I have no memory of any of those plays working from like 2016 to 2019. I don't know if you can recall any, Nick, but like there was a period of time under Zimmer where we completely shut down the screens because we got the tackling figured out in those scenarios. I think it's probably an adjustment period for the Vikings to do that there. And then honestly, the other stuff kind of was fluky to me. The one where Ivan Pace kind of slowed down on Baker and Baker was able to convert that first down, that was kind of a fluke to me.
Also, I think Danielle Hunter was held on that one. They didn't call it.
But... and then there were a couple like where the Bucs didn't even convert a first down, and we had the penalty on that field goal attempt that allowed them to convert a first down. So really, we kept the Vikings on the field with penalty mistakes and a couple of mishaps in that coverage area more than anything else to me.
Yeah, I mean, I came into this game with very low expectations with the defense because it's so many new faces, it's so many young faces. I assumed zero chemistry. This is a complex defense to learn. It's a whole new system. And man, Brian Flores, like out of the gate, really nailed it. Granted, second half they gave up a couple touchdowns, which was very frustrating, especially that one like really long drive where they just kept converting on third downs. But like, I will live with like what was it like a 36%. The Bucs were ultimately held to 6 of 17 on third downs. That is over a season, that's going to be at, if not the best in the NFL, top five in the NFL, 35% stop percentage on third down. That's really darn good. So I will take that. It was just kind of unfortunate that the Bucs bunched all their third down conversions into singular drives. Like
Yep.
ideally, you would space them all out evenly, so they get one third down conversion and then they punt on the next one when they get like to the 35-yard line or whatever. Instead, the Bucs were able to sort of string really long drive together in the second half. And part of that is, like you said, like guys were playing a little far off, or they were just a hair late. Byron Murphy too, in addition to Mekhi Blackman. But like, I was really worried about this DB core. I thought overall they played well, especially considering the level of competition. There are not many teams who have wide receivers of the caliber of talent of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and I feel like a Caleb Evans, Mekhi Blackman, and Byron Murphy all played really well. So I was really worried that like they'd get themselves like embarrassed on TV, and I didn't see that happening. In fact, I saw a number of reps where there was a play where Mekhi Blackman, I think, wound up being like it was in inverted coverage, and so he was the half safety, and he smothered
Hmm.
out a deep fade route to Mike Evans. There was another one where a Caleb Evans and Mike Evans got tangled up in another fade route to the other sideline, the left sideline, and Evans kind of smothered that out. You could have maybe called it defensive pass interference, but the contact was initiated by Mike Evans in his route, and so
Yeah.
like
And
Mekhi
I
Blackman's
think
a
Evans
small
stepped out of
receiver.
bounds on that one too because of the contact.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and so to be able to like press him to the boundary when like Mike Evans is one of the biggest receivers in the NFL and you are an undersized rookie, that's really impressive. So that's not to say they were perfect, and that's not to say that they weren't gifted a couple incompletions because Baker his accuracy wasn't perfect. But I feel like overall, DB's played I was impressed by them. It's just kind of unfortunate that they were able to sort of string together these long drives, but I don't. I thought they were generally executing well, and I thought generally the defense played well, especially in cover. Well, I think coverage, run defense was probably even more impressive. We'll get to that in a second. But like there were like small mistakes, but there weren't like glaring giant. How did you give up this 80-yard touchdown? I mean, some of the points that they gave up is like the Vikings fumbled the offense in their own
yeah,
territory. So like, and
I
we held them
mean,
to a field goal. That's pretty darn good. So
at the end of the day, the Vikings allowed 3.9 yards per play in this game. Like that's a really, really good mark. I saw something online today where the Vikings offense averaged the same yards per play, 5.9, as the 49ers did, and their defense allowed the same or fewer yards per play than the Steelers got in their game, right? Which was 3.9 for the Vikings or something like that, or it might have been 3.5 for the Bucks. Um, so from a yards per play perspective, maybe we should have seen a dismantling like the 49ers did of the Steelers. I don't think that's entirely encompasses everything, but the turnovers were a huge factor in this game that to me is the story of it, right? I do also want to give Baker a little bit of credit because when the Bucks were converting those first downs, he was getting the ball out very quickly at the top of his drop, right? There
yeah,
was a quick slant to Chris Godwin. There were the two plays I mentioned earlier, the screen and the slant to Mike Evans, and that is what's going to hurt this Flores defense, right? We're guaranteed an unblocked blitzer when we blitz with some of these rushes. The problem becomes if they can get the ball out of the top of their drop, the unblocked blitzer doesn't matter because literally a human being cannot get there quickly enough, right? So when they get the ball out at the top of their drop like that, we need our secondary to be able to tackle the guys short of the sticks on third down. And that just didn't happen on a couple of these occasions. And I think that was the major, difference between the first half and the second half is that Baker was getting the ball out quickly and then we weren't able to execute on what we needed to do to stop them from getting a first down.
yeah.
So I want to flip that into talking about the Vikings blitzes. Obviously, we've talked about how blitz happy. I did a little bit of charting myself because I kind of like the PFF blitz numbers are good, but one of the things about the Vikings defense is and the Ed Donatel defense last year, like our blitz numbers were probably inflated from the fact that we had 5 down defensive linemen on some plays, right? And we just rush all 5 of them. So I wanted to tease that out and see what the Vikings did. And it turns out that they blitzed on a very high percentage of their plays. So I had true blitzes on 16 of 37 dropbacks from the Buccaneers. That's 43%. And then of the 21 plays where they didn't blitz, they showed 11 plays of sim pressures. And then of those 21 plays, also 5 of those where they had 5 down rushers and they rushed all 5. Right? So really you could argue 21 of the plays were blitzes with those 5 down rushers. And then of the 16 that weren't true blitzes, 11 had the simulated pressures on the line of scrimmage. So we're putting a ton of guys in the box, and we're putting a ton of guys on the line of scrimmage in blitzing. We're not having too high safeties a lot. Like a lot of the too high coverages that we ran at Tampa 2 or whatever were invert coverages because we had guys so close to the line of scrimmage, and we're having guys haul back at the snap as part of the disguise. So I just wanted to get that out there as, the Vikings ran a ton of the blitzes. The other thing we saw, as I alluded to earlier, was Bangle, which is when the Vikings put, basically, you have every player who's not manned up on an opponent on the line of scrimmage. And if they keep anybody in to block, those guys add in, right? And they're supposed to peel off if any other guys run, but if they stay in to protect, they rush the passer. And then the rest of the defense is just a line across in off-man coverage, right? That's the Bengal formation. It's a cover zero blitz, and when they blitz, they send everybody. They're guaranteed to have a free rusher, like I talked about, because you have one more defender than you do offensive player when you count the 11th player as a quarterback, right? You only have 10 offensive players. Now, in this game, they dropped out a ton. My understanding, like when they send everybody, that's called Hawk. When they drop out, my understanding is it's called Bronco. But my understanding of Bronco from Coach Vass was that it's a cover 3 coverage. The Vikings were playing a ton of drop 8 Tampa 2 off of this split. So I don't know if that's a different coverage call that's not Bronco or what it is, but that seemed to be their primary change up to the Bronco call. Or to the Bengal in the Bengal formation. And it worked great, especially in the first half for Baker. The one time it didn't work was the red zone touchdown, where they just weren't able to get pressure, and eventually a guy found a window in the coverage and Baker found him for the touchdown. That's the second Bucs touchdown, I should clarify. But it's really exciting to see this blitz formation used all the time after Ed Donatel last year, and I just kind of wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, and the other thing that really surprised me about it was it looked like cover zero man, pure man to man on the back end, and then they'd snap the ball, and they would throw the craziest zone coverages at you. Like
Yeah.
it was I don't you know better than I do because you know the floor system better than I do, but it looks like it was mostly zone to me. Like it.
Oh yeah,
I was not.
they did not play a lot of man coverage in this game, to my eyes. Like the off man stuff was the only thing, and that almost looks like zone when they play it, because usually the ball's out so quick and all the guys' eyes are at the quarterback. Like in Bengal, the rule for the off-man corner, for the off-man defenders, is you are watching the quarterback. You are not watching, your receiver in front of you, because you're guaranteed to get that free rusher. So there's a time limit on when the quarterback needs to get the ball out by, or he's sacked.
It's insane to me. Like the entire first half, they might have run it 5+ times where it was Bengal, everybody on the line is a scrimmage. It looks like cover zero, and then they drop back into something that was either cover 3 or Tampa 2.
Yeah.
Which is like Tampa 2 is like the farthest. Tampa 2 and cover zero are like the two most different coverages in my mind. Like one is send the house
Yep.
man to man, and Tampa 2 is like, by the way, it was drop 8 Tampa 2. So
Yep.
they had like a pull runner and the 2 deep safeties and then 5 underneath zones, like it's cover 2.
Yeah.
So like that is,
And
like
they ran
prevent is like a Hail Mary defense and like an all blitz, and it's one of the two, and it like the two most differing things in the world. And you could also do everything in between. Sometimes they would send 3 and then they would also blitz a linebacker. Sometimes they would send the safety. They would also drop into cover 8 or into cover 3 or into something else. So it was like it was eye-opening to see how multiple they could be out of a cover 0 look, which I would have thought would be pretty restrictive because of how many guys you have in the line of scrimmage. But they were able to do a lot of really interesting things to it, and it's really fun to watch. So that'll be fun to watch going forward too.
Yeah, and the other thing too on the back end for the coverage is they put everybody everywhere. Like the most consistent thing I thought I saw was Harrison Smith as that pole runner, like the Tampa player in Tampa 2. And it's kind of an invert look because he started the deepest out of everybody, and then he's coming forward, where they'll put, like, they had a Caleb Evans in a half as a half safety. They had Byron Murphy as a half safety. There were snaps where it was obviously Josh Metellus and Cam Bynum. Like, that makes a lot more sense from what you typically expect. But it really was a lot of zone coverage, a lot of drop 8 stuff. Even when they weren't, everybody up on the line of scrimmage, they dropped 8 relatively often. We saw Danielle Hunter in coverage. We saw Patrick Jones in coverage, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. There were a number of plays, especially early on, where Baker double clutched because he looked directly at where a defensive end had dropped in coverage. So I think we're spacing the defensive ends in coverage probably better than we did in the Donatel defense, which shouldn't be much of a surprise considering how much of a disaster that was last year. So no, that was really really fun to see. So why don't we flip it over to the run defense here? Uh, I kind of teased this a little bit earlier, but I thought the run defense the major win was how many players we had in the box to make these run stops. But I want to give Cam Bynum a special shout out because he made two huge tackles coming down from depth. One was on 3rd down and 5, where the Bucs ran kind of an outside zone concept at a shotgun or whatever. And he came down and made that tackle. The other one was the one where the Vikings kind of sent a blitz around the edge, and they ended up being out-gapped, and Cam Bynum came down and prevented what I thought could have been a huge run from Rachaad White on that play. But otherwise, everybody along the defensive line, I don't think the interior has a lot of pass rush juice, but everybody's a stout player in run defense, so that was nice to see.
Yeah, some really good lock peek shed techniques, some teach tape in this game. Harrison Phillips is just dominant. But Bullard was really good too. Bullard had a few snaps where he like walked blockers back into the running back to cause a run stop. And Lowry, PFF didn't like his game, but I did. I thought he was really good too. So all those guys up front, credit Chris Rumpf because every guy he touches turns into a dog in the middle of the trenches. Lots of odd fronts, those help too. But yeah, the run defense was incredibly sound. The other thing that surprised me was I was worried with Ivan Pace in run defense.
Yep.
And he got a lot of snaps this game, and he proved why he earned basically a starting job with his Vikings defense, even over Asamoah, who I assume was healthy, and it was not injury related why Pace was getting most of the snaps. And he's just really good at knowing how to he's like a little sloop versus a galleon, if I can use some nautical warfare analogy. Like he's so nimble getting around big guys, and he's able to knife into gaps. I still think he's probably overall Hicks is really good in run defense because he hits hard and he's got that veteran savvy. Pace kind of understands where the ball is going, but also they have to keep him clean because the second that a guard climbs to the second level, he's toast. But
Pace to be fair, the guard has to attach to him because he slipped guys a couple times in this game and got in on tackles where he had a guard climbing up free to the second level and he completely made him miss. So I did like seeing that because he did that all the time in college, like all the time, multiple times a game. And I was concerned at the NFL level because the guards are just better, right? Where maybe you're not going to be able to get around him, but he's done it so far, which is great to see.
It's encouraging because I feel like that stout run defense will translate to other teams because we're going to continue to be single gap. We're going to continue to have guys up front who are really good at sort of blocking and peeking and being able to maintain gap integrity. I think Ivan Pace is going to continue to be really good. Like you worry about him getting blocked, but you don't have to worry about it because he's really good at letting himself run free. And I think Hicks did a good job. So I feel like all these things are translatable. And by the way, we haven't even said Danielle Hunter's name, who's probably the most impressive run defender out there. Like he was just demolishing guys.
Oh, he had an awesome play where it was outside zone to the other side. He was the unblocked defender on the backside and just ran it down from the backside. And it wasn't like the running back cutback or anything.
We're like an hour into this podcast. We haven't talked about Danielle Hunter, who in my mind was like clearly the best player on the field of both teams. So. But Danielle Hunter, still really good.
It is weird because a lot of Hunter's production came early in the game, and then there's all this stuff. Like, if the Vikings had won the game, I think we would have started off with talking about how dominant Danielle Hunter is. But we kind of got to get through all the, hey, why did the Vikings lose this game before we can talk about some of the fun, good stuff that they did. So
there were so many reps where it was drop 8 and Danielle Hunter was still getting
a pressure.
It was like double team versus Danielle Hunter, and he's like, I'm still going to get home. So, Hunter, just an elite talent.
Well, that was his sack, right? Like, he got through 2 guys somehow. And then early in the game, like the first drive on that 3rd down, he forced a holding call where he just used his unique move. I think Brandon Thorne put the compilation out on Twitter, but it's like, I forgot what he called the move. It's like an arm push pull where it just gets around guys. It's kind of crazy. And he did that at 8 yards of depth, which is where the quarterback drops back to. So that's really important when you're looking at guys who win around the edge. If they're winning at 11 yards, like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not a win. That's actually a loss, and it's a win for the offensive lineman.
The Buccaneers' first drive, the first play of the game, Danielle Hunter caused a pass
Yep.
deflection, so forced an incompletion. And on second down, he drove the tackle into Baker Mayfield's lap and caused pressure that resulted in an errant throw. And on third down, he got another pressure that
Yep.
Forced a check down that the Vikings rallied to. So
Exactly.
basically, it was a one man three and out.
Yeah. No,
He's a really good player.
it was crazy good stuff. Back to Ivan Pace a little bit. We saw him get way more snaps than Brian Asamoah in this game. That definitely surprised me a little bit, considering how the Vikings had talked about Brian Asamoah. But people were talking all offseason, is Ivan Pace going to start over Asamoah? And I think we did get our answer. Like, to me, it's just there's no way, if the Vikings thought that Brian Asamoah, sorry, was better than Ivan Pace, that Pace would play like 60 snaps and Asamoah would play too. So that is definitely an interesting development that he wasn't able to get in this game. The one question I had for you on Pace is, what did you think of that Baker third down conversion at the end of the game? Right, Pace kind of slows up a little bit. To me, it's really hard to get into the guy's head there, right? Maybe he thought his best path was to wrap Baker up, but to me, the way he approaches it, like he slows down a little bit. I think he's almost expecting Baker to slide, or he doesn't want to, get a helmet to helmet penalty that's going to kill the game for him. So I give him a little bit of a leeway there for, not blowing Baker up and kind of making the stop there, but it's just a really hard situation I think he was put in.
Yeah, it's tough. You don't want to draw the penalty in that crucial situation. I do think he probably could have come down a little bit harder,
Yeah.
or reacted a little bit quicker. But on that one, still, I think Danielle Hunter makes that play if he doesn't get held. He was the end man on the line of scrimmage, and I think the tackle gets away with one as Hunter's
Hmm.
spinning away to like chase down Baker. I think Hunter's athletic enough to chase down Baker Mayfield, and they didn't call. They didn't
Yep.
either. They didn't catch it, or they didn't think it was enough. So. Yeah, I mean, not ideal. I don't think Pace was perfect, but I think he was pretty darn good enough. I think right now he's currently PFF's third highest graded rookie defender, so
Wow.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And sometimes I quibble with PFF grades, but I think he earned it. So not perfect, but a good player. And the things that you were worried about that resulted in him going undrafted, I feel like he's gave answers that make you a little bit more confident on this being real and not just a mirage. So exciting player to watch.
Yeah. And then the last player of note is Josh Metellus. I mean, we talked how we kind of knew Josh Metellus was going to have this big of a role. Like, this is kind of how the Brian Flores defense operates when they go nickel uh, against, opponents' 11 personnel. They put Josh Metellus in there quite a bit. There was some run from Mekhi Blackman, but there's a lot of three safety looks in this defense, right? What did you think of Josh Metellus's game overall?
I thought he didn't stand out in a bad way, which is he was kind of like I thought of him. He's listed as a safety, and I kind of just thought he was the nickel, or like the dime back.
Yeah.
And I thought he was good, and the versatility was huge. He made a couple plays where he was the pull runner in Tampa 2, i.e., the
Hmm.
guy who lines up in the middle kind of like a on the center, and then he'll drop back all the way to be the deep middle of the field safety, or at least the Tampa 2 version of the middle of the field
Yeah.
safety. And then he also had a lot of plays where he was triggering downfield and stopping screens or stopping runs, right in their tracks, or for a minimal gain. So I don't think it wasn't like a Josh Metellus highlight reel out there, but I feel like he was a good player. He was a solid player, and I feel like against a Bucks a number of Bucks weapons that like caused me some concern. I feel like Metellus showed out, so he's another valuable member. Like my whole problem with Brian Flores is like, okay, I like the system, I like being man heavy, blitz heavy, but do we have the horses in the stable to actually pull this
Yeah.
off? And I feel like the takeaway from week one is like you went up against Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and a lot of other guys, and you had Josh Metellus and Mekhi Blackman and all these other guys, and they stood up to they were up to the challenge. So nothing blew me away necessarily in Metellus, but like just the fact that he survived and came away looking pretty good to me is like when you grade it on a curve, I think it's impressive. So excited to watch him more going forward.
Yeah, I will say I have a couple concerns about Metellus in this game. I thought he was responsible for that Mike Evans touchdown. I mean, obviously he was the guy in coverage.
Oh yeah,
It
that's right. I
was
forgot about that.
it was a difficult spot for him to be put in because
He
he's
was just
kind of
flat-footed, so
kind of the safety, but he ended up getting caught flat-footed, which is a situation you don't want to be in. You want to be dynamic and able to run with that and not get beat in that scenario. There was also a play where he ended up as a corner, and Byron Murphy was kind of the half safety, or it was an interesting situation because the Bucs motioned and it turned into a bunch, and Metellus was on the line of scrimmage, and Chris Godwin just beat Metellus inside. Now Byron Murphy almost came down and made a hit to knock the ball out as it was caught, so it may have been Murphy's coverage, but I think the quickness and the route running ability of the better wide receivers is not something you want Metellus manned up on, or in a one-on-one situation against. And that's something we saw the Bucs able to get against the Vikings, or the Vikings kind of taking a gamble on a blitz, and now Metellus is in this coverage. It's a little bit of a concern to me. But the same would be true, I guess, for Cam Bynum or Harrison Smith, right? Like, you don't want your safeties in man coverage on wide receivers. That's why cornerbacks are corners and safeties are safeties, or that kind of big dime player in Metellus. I'd rather see him focused on opposing tight ends, right? And I think in those roles and in the run defense roles, he was very good.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't perfect. What did you think of the second Bucks touchdown, where it was kind of just like it was Bengal, but they dropped eight, and so there wasn't any pressure, and they just kind of like Baker was able to fire in
Yeah,
kind of a
so
crossing route.
somebody needs to follow that crossing route. There were too many droppers, right? Because they dropped eight. It might have been on Patrick Jones to kind of work across, because I think Patrick Jones was the player to the left of the receiver who continued to cross the field, to work underneath that. And then Jordan Hicks, I think, got pulled down to the running back in the flat, which I think is correct.
Yeah.
But Metellus, I think, also got pulled to the left in that scenario. So if I had to guess, like, I would almost put that responsibility on Metellus as well, as somebody who needs to drive down in those late crossing routes or have some sort of route recognition in front of them, rather than just seeing Baker look left and move left. Because Baker
Yeah.
was looking to his left on the play, and that's what drove the players left. But like all their receivers were coming back across to the right, so there needs to be some level of route recognition, particularly in the red zone, right? Because the quarterback's eyes are going to try to fool you in those locations.
Yeah.
So it was probably on the coverage call in something that wasn't meant
I
to
didn't
be
love that.
sustained that long, but somebody needed to get better spacing in the coverage there as well. So with that, that's kind of the entirety of the game. I have a note on the special teams. Like, we had a bad defensive DVOA in this game. Obviously we had the one bad return. We were a little bit worse on punts than the Bucks were. I would say they had a bit higher net average and stuff like that, but I'm not really sure what the total deal is. The one thing I just wanted to lament is, like, I don't even remember who the kicker was. It like Chase McLaughlin or something? Somebody who's not, Justin Tucker, right? Is just every single kicker against us turns into Justin Tucker and hits these freaking 57-yard field goals, man. It's really annoying.
That's a struggle. That's just Vikings luck. Nobody misses against us.
Yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, let's flip it over kind of to the Eagles preview. We're running a bit long here, so we're going to cut this a little bit short. One of the things I don't know, I have a NFL Sunday ticket now, and I was able to watch Red Zone for the entire afternoon, which was nice. It's a bit expensive for that privilege, but it was nice. Um, and the Eagles did not look good on offense against the Patriots. It was a bit of a sloppy game, like there was a lot of rain and stuff. But the Patriots defense, which, to be fair, is extremely good. They were one of the best defenses in the NFL last year. They're coached by the legend Bill Belichick, the guy who we're hoping to get some of that defense with our team right now. But they really shut them down both in the run and the pass game. So that's encouraging. But I'm not sure how well we match it. I guess I'm pretty confident in our matchup against the Eagles run game with the way we run defense. It's very similar to the way the Patriots run defense. Like you said, we kind of kicked ass up front in this previous game. I'm kind of excited to see how we do against a very varied and diverse Eagles run game. My concern is AJ Brown and Devontae Smith on the edges, right? Like, Baker and the Bucks weren't really able to attack us deep, right? It was a lot of nickel and diming down the field. There wasn't really a big play. I think the longest play was that Mike Evans touchdown, and beyond that, it was like 10 or 14 yards or something really short like that. But the deep ball from Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, I blanked on his name there for a second, is going to be a big concern for me in this game if our corners are actually going to hold up. This will be, I think, a bigger test than the Bucks were, honestly.
Yeah, and one thing that worries me is if you're going to give him these zero looks, like it's really hard to cover AJ Brown and
Mm,
Devontae Smith,
hmm.
but it's also really hard to tackle AJ Brown, especially if
Yes.
you're giving it one-on-one coverage. So like, I'm a little terrified if you like leave Mekhi Blackman one-on-one with AJ Brown because like if he misses that tackle, that's going all the way. So that's going to be tough. And then obviously Eagles, one of the most ferocious. It's funny they never like have an all-pro caliber like J.J. Watt or Aaron Donald type or one of the Bosa brothers, but everyone on the defensive line, including all the backups, is always really good, especially getting pressure up front. So that's going to be a challenge, especially when if they
Well,
struggled against the Bucs pass rush, they're definitely going to struggle against the Eagles
J-
pass rush.
Jalen Carter looked freaking awesome in that game,
Yeah,
which is scary considering he's a rookie. They have Jordan Davis, who I don't think has really shown out, but Jordan Davis can be your Vita Vea type guy, right? What the Vikings struggled with Vita Vea because he's absolutely massive and quick. Like I think Jordan Davis can provide that, but the Bucs, especially because Kalijah Cansey, their rookie, went out early in the game, didn't have a speed element in the interior. I think that's what Jalen Carter I think gives you everything, but that speed and that lighter rusher from the interior, I'm interested to see how the offensive line handles that.
yeah. I think they need to come in with an answer for quick pressure and an answer for blitz counters because they didn't really. I feel like they didn't necessarily have it, and they're probably not going to be able to get away with as many long developing passes and
Mm-hmm.
play action passes. I would like to like what the Bucks did in this game, where they had like a lot of like one step, quick slant, glance route type stuff. I feel like that could be effective here against the Eagles, but also. I feel like the Eagles are just one of the most talented top to bottom teams in the NFL. Great offensive line, great defensive line. They've got guys in the secondary. They've got arguably the best 1-2 wide receiver. Jalen Hurts didn't look great last week, but he was an MVP candidate last year, and that's probably more true to who we'll get on Thursday night. So it's an opportunity to wash the bad taste out of Sunday's game out of your mouth, but it's also an opportunity to be very very quickly down to 0-2. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like in the back seven, I think they're a little bit weaker this year than they were last year. So I think that is a little bit of a benefit. Obviously, they lost, I think, both of their linebackers from last year, TJ Edwards and another guy who I'm forgetting. Uh, and they were supposed to have N'Kobe Dean, right, who we all liked coming out of school,
Yeah.
but he hurt his foot, so it sounds like he's probably not going to play in the game. James Bradbury, their other very good corner, along with Darius Slay, Bradbury isn't going to play in this game, it sounds like, as well. So the Vikings got a little lucky on the injury front there. And then they have Reed Blankenship, who you may remember from a long Christian Watson touchdown last year when Jordan Love came in that game. Um, and Justin Evans, who was actually a former Buck, but really never has played all that well in the secondary. So I think in the middle of the field, particularly like Christian Ellis and Zach Cunningham are the other linebackers. Zach Cunningham's a solid run defender, but he's always been bad in coverage. To me, like there is room to exploit the middle of the field. Maybe it's a TJ Hawkinson game where we're able to get him going on stick knot or something, maybe vertical in the middle of the field. Or whoever's filling in on the outside, if we can attack it with quick in breaking routes, maybe, obviously I think they're going to keep Darius Slay on Justin Jefferson as much as they can, right? So last year we got all the talk about how Darius Slay shut Justin Jefferson down because they were doubling Justin Jefferson on every snap, right? But if they do that again in this game, maybe it's a bit of a breakout for Jordan Addison or TJ Hawkinson gets more. But I think the Vikings in this time where they went very heavy personnel in week 1 against the Bucs, I think they might want to end up going lighter personnel against the Eagles just to spread them out a little bit more and get more of the defensive backs where they're weaker than they are on the front seven on the field.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
The one last thing we want to leave you with, you kind of mentioned it, going 0-2 is very bad for football teams. I don't know if this has changed since we've moved to 17 games, but it used to be something like less than 15% of teams that went 0-2 made the playoffs. So that's like a 10-15% chance to make the playoffs. You're pretty much dead in the water as a football team at that point. So the Vikings really need to avoid going 0-2 if they want to become competitive this year. And we thought the Bucs were supposed to be one of the easier games on the schedule, right? We've kind of gone through in detail why it was a bit of a fluky loss, right? Like I don't think it's time to panic and the Vikings are going to be, in contention for the number 1 overall pick or something like that. but they're definitely going to struggle to make the playoffs if they lose both of their first 2 games. And obviously, I think most of us has penciled this Eagles game in as a loss prior to the season, right? Just because of how talented they are. So it's a really big hurdle to overcome here in this game.
Yeah. Although, granted, the reason being 0-2 usually leads to very few playoff outcomes is not because 0-2 is impossible to be overcome, but because most of the teams who start out 0-2 are really bad.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons the main reason they're 0-2 is because they're really bad. So it's possible if you're a good team that just happen to have some bad bounces of luck, like 0-2 is not the worst situation. At the same time, I'm very zen about the Vikings this year because, like, if they suck, it's a great quarterback draft. This is the perfect opportunity. Kirk Cousins will be a free agent next year, so like it's not the worst year to have, to lose all your 1-score games. So I could live with that.
Yeah, if you're not a Kirk fan, I think there's a very easy path to tell yourself where, hey, if the Vikings...
look, I'm a Kirk fan, but he's 35. He's going to be 36 next year. So, look at Aaron Rodgers. Eventually, Kirk Cousins is currently the second oldest starter in the NFL, and now with Aaron Rodgers down, is the oldest starter in the NFL. So you got to think about succession planning at this point.
No, absolutely. If you're of the mind that the Vikings should probably think about moving on from Kirk Cousins at the end of the season, not having the best record at the end of the year isn't really that big of a negative for the team, right? So I do think there is a little bit of a silver lining there. Obviously, on game day every week, I want the Vikings to win a football game. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to change from that attitude because it's just way more fun and I feel better when they do. So
losing sucks.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. With all that, I think we're going to wrap it up here. We got an hour and 15 in, so we're doing pretty good, Nick. I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He is Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Our co-host Greg is at You've Been Gregged. You can find him on Instagram. The show is Kindred Skulls. You can find us at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. We're on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Anything final to say before we log off, Nick?
Thanks for listening. We don't do ads or anything, so like we're here grinding the L22 because like we like you guys. So thank you for listening.
No, we like doing it, and we love having an outlet and listeners who really, some of you guys really engage with us, and it's great to see the feedback from people. So we love to see it. Drop us those 5-star reviews, drop us some comments, add us on Twitter about it. We love to talk ball, so it's great.
Friends. We do like zero marketing for this thing. So.
Yeah. We are wonderful at it. All right. With that, Skol Vikings.
We love you. Go, baby.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score